Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day 458, June the 11th, 2018, Monday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Well, let's see. I'm still deciding on Dumbass of the Week. Hopefully I'll get to that tomorrow. A couple contestants I'm still researching on, so we're going to skip by that today. And we're going to move right on, but hopefully I'll get to that tomorrow, Peter. We won't forget. We'll get it in there this week. Hopefully tomorrow. Yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed the last couple days of the G7, with Trump at the G7, like a boss. Did anyone love as much as I did that photo where Trump's sitting at the table and he's like this, and Merkel and the rest are all leaned around the table looking in at him, and he's just like, ain't budging. I've told you the way it is. And it's just amazing to have a president that's that strong, that will stand up to world leaders like that, and he doesn't care. I mean, he campaigned on the fact that he was going to take care of American workers. He was going to deal with the bad trade issues, and he's doing it. And, you know, in a lot of ways, I think that as much as a lot of Democrats despise Trump and they have Trump derangement syndrome, you know, in a lot of ways, I think there's a lot of those wacko lefties who wish that they had someone in the Democratic Party that was half the fighter that Trump is. Bernie certainly wasn't. He laid down and got steamrolled by the DNC and the Right Reverend Clinton. He didn't fight back. Not at all. So do you think Bernie would be fighting for, standing up to these world leaders, fighting for American workers? No way. He would fold like a cheap suit. He has nowhere near the tenacity and the intestinal fortitude of President Trump. So I hope those of you out there watching this video were as happy as I was to see Trump's performance at the G7. And then he skips off out of there and heads on to his summit with Kim and leaves the rest of them in his wake, fit to be tied. It's just absolutely amazing to watch Trump operate. Amazing. Okay, so I told you yesterday that I've been looking into some things regarding some links that have been left for me. The one that probably caught my eye the most was the link by Tiana. And so I had some time to go through and look at that. And so it links back to a Facebook page by someone who goes by the name Rex. And so Rex has obviously done some good research and done some good work, although I like to kind of get, you know, at least a second or third source on just about everything before I talk about it. So I spent, you know, several hours today just trying to verify a lot of the things that he says in his posts, and I was able to verify just about everything that he says. So I am going to go through here and go point by point and tell you some new things that we've learned about Priebus and Papagalopoulos and another character whose name is just now popping up thanks to Rex, because I'd never heard this guy's name. I'd heard it in the past. He's been around for a long time. I'd heard his name, but not associated with the Trump campaign or Papagalopoulos or anything like this. So this is something I think Rex has stumbled onto, and so whoever Rex is, he did a very good job, because I double-checked some of these things, and it is true, a lot of the things that he's saying in his Facebook or his Twitter feed. So let me go through these things for you. First of all, he lays out that, in fact, Papagalopoulos knew Reince Priebus long before the campaign. They worked together at the Hudson Institute. That is true. That is true. And both Priebus and Papagalopoulos did work on a project called the Noble Energy Project. And when you dig into the Noble Energy Project, you find a lot of shady characters who would be associated with the deep state, the Clintons, and others. We'll get back to that in a moment. So those are two facts that he lays out that are absolutely true and can be verified. Multiple sources on the left and right. He also talks about there being 3 events that happened on one day that he believes are closely related and have something to do with one another. And those 3 events occurred on July the 27th of 2017. The first was July 27th, 2017 was the day that Horowitz And Rodenstein revealed to Uncle Bob the Executioner the texts of Peter's Been Stroking Us and Lisa Page. On that exact day, Papadopoulos was also arrested at Dulles International Airport after he had just come back from that overseas trip where he had been in Greece and some various other places where he had run into that Israeli businessman, I guess, who tried to offer him some money. So some strange things occurred on that foreign trip. He comes back, and as soon as he gets back to Dulles International Airport, he's arrested. And of course, we know the strange circumstances surrounding that. It doesn't appear that they had a warrant, and it doesn't appear at any time after he was arrested that he was ever got a lawyer. That he apparently sat down and talked with the FBI, agreed to talk with them, and never thought of keeping his mouth shut and getting a lawyer. He, gave them what they wanted, I guess, and never got legal representation. Very, very strange for someone because Papadopoulos is not a stupid person. He's pretty well educated. He does a lot of world traveling. His father was a kind of a big shot in politics and things and such. So, Papadopoulos, he obviously was smart enough to figure out at some point that he was being played. So, he's not a stupid person. He's a young, inexperienced person maybe, but Papadopoulos wasn't, is not an idiot. So then we also learn that on that same day, that is the day that Reince Priebus, resigned or was essentially booted out of the Trump team. Now, I can see where Pop's being arrested at Dulles International Airport and Priebus being kicked out on the same day. I can see where those two, are together because, Priebus obviously came into the campaign and brought along with him Papadopoulos. But there's more to that story as well. I don't really know how Horowitz Rodenstein revealing to Uncle Bob the Executioner about the Page Strzok text. I don't know how that fits into the other two things. But anyway, it is interesting that all three of those things happened on the same day. July 27th, 2017. They're on my timeline. Okay. Now, in the process of going through this, and there's some other facts I have as well, which you're going to get to, but in the context of doing that, I also got a few questions that I stumbled onto other things on the peripheral, and I got a few questions popped into my head. One of those questions, as I was looking at this, was, who was it that paid for Carter Page's trip to Cambridge? Now, he says that he paid his own way, he paid his own ticket and his own expenses to go give the Moscow speech. Now, of course, he was being paid for the Moscow speech, I assume, but as far as no one said, hey, Pops, come, we'll pay your travel, we'll pay your hotel or whatever. Not like what happened with Papadopoulos at Cambridge, and apparently it's not what happened to Carter Page when he went to Cambridge either. Now, we had a point in the hearings when Carter Page was testifying to a Senate committee, and in that testimony, he was talking about something, answering a question that he'd been given, and he was just about ready to say the name of the person who paid his transportation and his lodging to go to Cambridge, when he was cut off by Mike Conaway. Mike Conaway is a anti-Trump Republican. So just as about the time that Carter Page is about to tell us who paid for his travel expenses to go to Cambridge, Mike Conaway cuts him off and says, quote, "We don't care about that. Tell us about the Russians." Now, both of these were invites. Carter Page was invited to give that speech in Moscow. He was also invited to Cambridge. So we've also learned that it was Clovis who actually hired Papadopoulos and Page. But we're now finding out that it was Jeff Sessions who was the final word on Trump's foreign policy team. That's right. Trump had named Jeff Sessions to be his overall decider on who would be on his foreign policy team. Now, it appears that what was happening is that Trump was a little slow in getting this, he didn't like a lot of these people around him. He hadn't started putting together campaign staffs, unlike all the other candidates who are, established politicians, have all these people in place, have all these things in place. Trump was kind of not there. He was traveling around doing his speeches, and he had a skeleton crew behind him, including his foreign policy team. And apparently, from what Jared Kushner says, is they were getting kind of pressured by the media and other people who were saying, you don't even have a foreign policy team? I mean, here we are in the middle of the summer, you're out campaigning, but you don't even have an idea who your foreign policy advisors will be or anything like that. So under a certain amount of pressure, they kind of quickly put together a foreign policy campaign advisory team. And at that time, Trump decided to make Jeff Sessions the final word on who would be on that foreign policy campaign team. So it was Jeff Sessions' final approving of Papadopoulos and Carter Page to be on Trump's campaign team. And so the next question you have to ask yourself, because when other people have been asked around the Trump campaign if they knew about Carter Page's, connections and activities with the Russians, Papadopoulos' globetrotting around talking to Russians or people associated with Russians, they all pretty much said no, we really didn't know about all that. But the one person that they have never really asked is Jeff Sessions. So the question becomes, what did Jeff Sessions know about Papadopoulos and Carter Page? Did Clovis just call him up and say, yeah, well, I got these two guys recommended to me by this guy, and this guy's a pretty heavy player, knows a lot of people. Apparently these are two good guys. We can bring them in the campaign. We don't have to pay them. They'll be unpaid. We can put them on the list. They'll serve the purpose of satisfying the media that we actually have a foreign policy team. So how about we just throw these guys on the list, and how about that? And maybe Sessions just said, okay, Clovis, that sounds good. Who are they? Good. Yeah, we'll write them down. And then at that point, Sessions never checks on them or anything like that. Or is it possible that Sessions knew more than he's ever said about Papadopoulos and Carter Page? And is that maybe why he felt he had to recuse himself, because he knew more about Papadopoulos and Carter Page's activities than he let on or revealed, and he maybe didn't want to get into the muck and then be asked that question 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months down the road when he was already weighing in and taking part in these investigations. It's really hard to say what's going on here, but it is interesting to note that the final word on Papadopoulos and Page was Jeff Sessions. Here's another thing. Uncle Bob the Executioner, he busts Papadopoulos, arrests him at the airport, and what we know that happens after that, he gets arrested, he pleads guilty. Now we're waiting to see if he ever gets sentenced. He decides to cooperate, he wears a wire, all this stuff goes on. And of course, the only thing that we see mentioned in all the Papadopoulos documents that we've seen from Uncle Bob the Executioner, and the only person whose name really came up around him, according to Uncle Bob, was Mifsud, who they tell us, according to Uncle Bob the Executioner, is a Russian agent or connected to the Russians in some way. But now we know that Mr. Mifsud is actually much more connected to British intelligence than he is Russians. Does Uncle Bob understand that, or was he lying to us? Does Uncle Bob the Executioner really believe that Mifsud is somehow connected to Russians when all the evidence is that he's connected to British intelligence? Could Uncle Bob the Executioner be just wrong, or could he be lying to us? And why? Because Papadopoulos had contact with everybody named in the dossier. So why did Uncle Bob the Executioner only want to talk about Mifsud but not really mention Milian, Halper, Downer, or Timoviv, all players who Papadopoulos spoke with? But Uncle Bob the Executioner never had any interest in any of those people, and he certainly never mentioned them. In his indictment of Papadopoulos, he only talks about Mifsud, where he mischaracterizes Mifsud as being a Russian agent, when in fact he's most likely a British agent. That's an interesting question for Uncle Bob the Executioner. Now, probably the most interesting thing we learned from this new information from this person, Rex, is kind of a new name. Not necessarily a new name in politics or Republican politics or anything like that, because he's been around forever and he's very connected. But his association with Trump and other people in Trump's team. His name is Ed Cox. Ed Cox. C-O-X. Many of you have heard the name. Ed Cox currently still is the head of the New York Republican Party, the New York GOP. He is married to Trish Nixon, daughter of Tricky Dick. Cox worked for the law firm founded by Bill Donovan. Bill Donovan was the father of the CIA. It was Cox who sent Papadopoulos to the Trump campaign, to Mr. Clovis, and then on up the ranks. Cox was the director for Noble Energy, where Papadopoulos and Priebus worked when they were working together at the Hudson Institute. They were doing work for Noble Energy. A lot of people connected to Noble Energy. Cox was the New York chair for Senator Magoo's presidential campaign. Carter Page, was also an advisor on that campaign. So maybe Cox is saying, well, when I was working here handling Senator Magoo's campaign during the presidential election when he was running for president, and I was handling his things here in New York, I had Carter Page working for me as an energy consultant or what have you, as a person on the political periphery. Maybe he just thought, okay, I'll do the same thing I did when I was working for Senator Magoo. Now that I'm working for Trump, I think I'll give Carter Page a call. Maybe he wants to join in on this as well. It's kind of unusual to think about someone who was working on the Senator Magoo campaign who brought in Carter Page on that campaign, and then he does the exact same for Trump. Cox was also a roommate in college of William Colby. William Colby was a future CIA director. Cox was also allied with Paul Singer. Paul Singer was the anti-Trump Republican who was backing Marco Rubio during the 2016 Republican primary. We should also be noted that the Clintons are big investors in Noble Energy. Cox was also close with Senator Magoo. He's linked to Papadopoulos, Reince Priebus, Carter Page, and even Manafort. And then there's this other little thing that's not mentioned by Rex, which I stumbled onto, which is that Cox was involved a little while back in a scandal where, in this particular scandal, some Republican folks there in New York placed a GPS monitoring device on the car of their Democratic opponent, New York Democrat Sheldon Silver, and got caught. We also know that Cox ran for the Senate seat in New York, and he lost in the Republican primary, and he lost the Republican primary to Judge Jeanine Pirro. And then she went on to lose to the Democrat. So, here we have this man, Ed Cox. And it now looks like he was the person who really is the one who brought Page in for sure. And also, because of Papadopoulos' connections to Reince Priebus, it looks like that's the way he got in there. But Page is connected to Cox is connected to all these people again. So this is a name that kind of just pops up, and he's in the peripheral again in the background, but you can see where, obviously Papadopoulos and Carter Page were the two key people that were being honed in on that they could set up as possible of colluding with Trump, Russia type thing. They could use these guys, and it was someone, this Mr. Cox, who worked those guys into the campaign, and he certainly would have known everything about these two guys. So if any of these things were brought to question, someone like Mr. Cox would have known about the types of things that that Papadopoulos and Carter Page have been associated with. Yet he goes ahead and recommends them. Yet he still stayed in the background. This is, we're just now hearing this name. But he appears to come from pretty much the establishment side of things. He's connected to a lot of people on both sides. It's not like a Democrat Republican thing. It's more of a sort of a deep state, or the major elite players in the world, and he kind of gravitates around where the power is. He kind of gravitates around the power, whether it's coming from the left or the right doesn't seem to matter. So part of that uniparty, I guess you would say. So he is a suspicious character at this point, in my opinion. And so thank you, Tiana, for leaving that link. It certainly gives us a lot more insight as we try to understand how Papadopoulos and Carter Page found themselves into this political campaign. And it appears to have come through Mr. Cox, Reince Priebus, and then Jeff Sessions making the final decision. How much he knew, I don't know. But obviously a case of oversight, because if you knew that these two guys were involved in this kind of stuff, and there's nothing that they've been involved in that's illegal, it's just that you know, knowing that Trump was being hammered over his association or wanting to have a good relationship with the Russians, wanting to sit down and talk to Putin, wanting to work with the Russians on fighting terrorists, wanting to work with the Russians on resolving something in Syria that didn't result in putting more troops on the ground and expanding the war, another war in the Middle East, all these sorts of things. Page and Papadopoulos could easily be played into the narrative, could be inserted into the campaign, and then you could use these connections to create a phony story like what we see in the dossier. They served the purpose very well, almost like they were selected right out of central casting. Almost like, okay, we need a couple people now that we can put in the campaign. They don't have to be paid, they don't have to be big shots in the campaign. They can be distant, low-level people. We just need a couple guys who we can draw association with Russians or whatever, who we can play, set up, trap, whatever. And we've got our man Mr. Halper and some of his buddies working with the CIA and MI6 and British intelligence and God knows who else. And we can work a game here. So, it's hard to know exactly, to untangle this. And I have to say that after even looking at all this, I still don't know what to think about Papadopoulos. Carter Page, I know a lot of people think he was part of the plan and part of the plant. He was cooperating or whatever. I don't know, man. It's hard to take him seriously. He's just such a weenie. Papadopoulos, again, I mean, I'm not quite there. I'm not quite where I need to be to believe that Papadopoulos was an active part of the plot and was participating in a plot. I still think he was pretty much taken advantage of, used, set up, whatever you want to say. I still think that's true. I'm not quite there yet, where a lot of other people are kind of, okay, Papadopoulos is obviously part of the plot, or whatever. I'm not quite there yet, because I don't know what he gained. I don't know what he gained. Maybe in a couple of years from now or something, we'll see where he's stumbled on some great job or something like that. But at this point, I just don't know what Papadopoulos would have gotten from it, and it just seems like he's not like the rest of the players who were actively involved in the plot. He's not like a Halper. He's not like a Downer. He's not like a Mifsud. He's not like any of these guys. These guys are all connected, big time connected, experienced, deep connections. Papadopoulos, doesn't have that. I mean, it's not in his background. And so at this point, I've still got to go with Papadopoulos. I'm still leaning that he was essentially played. And so that's kind of where I am now. My opinion could change if I see more evidence. I'm still not quite there, but this is all very interesting to see right here. And the role that Mr. Cox played in all this, and the fact that Jeff Sessions was the final word. What did he know? What did he know? Maybe we'll find that out at some point. Okay, so the next thing that's kind of funny is we had one of the best things I've heard in a very long time today. We had the president of the European Union, Donald Tusk, say that the international order is being challenged by Trump. Yes, yes, that's exactly what's happened. That's why we voted for him, to challenge the global New World Order. Mr. Tusk is not happy that Trump is upsetting the apple cart. And he's doing it like a boss, with no apologies, and he's not hiding the fact. He tells them, I don't like globalism. Hadn't worked. Hadn't worked for American workers, hasn't worked for European workers, hasn't worked for anybody but you folks. And we're going to unwind it. And you can't have the New World Order if the U.S. is not in it. And if the U.S. president is not on board for the New World Order, it ain't going to happen. We also have this crazy thing going on with Trudeau. He comes out after Trump leaves and then says that we're not going to be pushed around or whatever. Well, Canada has a lot of tariffs on our stuff coming in, and Trudeau needs to come clean and admit the fact that Canada has a lot of tariffs on certain sectors of our economy where they have tariffs on things that we ship to Canada, and it's not fair, period. And that needs to be renegotiated. That needs to be solved. Trudeau obviously has to try to look tough. I know he don't want to get steamrolled and to be seen being steamrolled, but he's going to lose this fight. But I guess that was what he wanted to be all over Twitter. But unfortunately, what's actually all over Twitter is that while he was making that speech, one of his eyebrows, which apparently is a glued-on eyebrow, apparently came unglued. And it's pretty hilarious. I'm sure many of you have seen it. So now that's what people are talking about on Twitter, not about the statement that he made. So big fail for Trudeau. That's called the Trump curse. Finally, we have Devin Nunes coming out and making a statement. They've issued or reissued the subpoena or whatever, and set a new deadline for Rodenstein and Wray for the DOJ to produce the intel on that FBI spy, who we know who that is. And he's given him a date of Tuesday. That would be tomorrow, which is the day that Kim Jong-un and Trump have their meeting. So that would be a good day for them to hand it over. But at this point, there's really nothing that Nunes has to threaten him with. He can't even threaten him with impeachment or anything like that because he doesn't have enough Republicans behind him, or Democrats for that matter, or enough people behind him. He's got about 30 guys. He needs about 200 and something, 205, 206. And he needs the speaker. Ryan seems to be okay with pushing for them to give us the documents, but when it comes to impeaching Rodenstein or Wray, or Sessions for that matter, that's where he backs down. He won't go that far. So Nunes doesn't have enough numbers behind him to put any real teeth into his threat. So I don't expect that Rodenstein and Wray are going to turn over all the documents telling Nunes all about Mr. Halper. I don't expect he'll do that at all. We'll see what they get. The DOJ said they are going to give up some information or whatever. We'll see. But, I mean, until they can actually put the real pressure on these guys, I just wish at this point that they would encourage the president to set up a presidential commission and just stop all the games altogether with the DOJ, with the FBI, with the Congress. Screw all that. It's going nowhere fast. It's nothing but a game that just gets played day after day after day. The president can appoint his own commission, which answers to him, and he can put anybody he wants on it, and he can give them the basic staff around them with the security clearances to get the documents that they can work it all out, and it would be done publicly. It would kill a lot of birds with one stone. It would be the best move Trump could make right now. It would take it out of the political realm. So that's what Trump should do, presidential commission. In the first place they need to look is determine what happened with that server, and the next thing they need to look at is the 6-agency task force run by Mr. Potato Head, who's out talking and tweeting today, making a fool of himself as usual. So another thing that Nunes wants is the last thing that the DOJ said was that they were going to release these classified documents that would be seen only by the Gang of Eight. And Nunes is saying no to that. He's given a pretty good reason for that. I'll spare you that. But basically, Nunes says no, the information that we want and the records we want turned over need to be turned over to all committee members on the House Intelligence Committee and all their designated staff. So that is what Nunes is saying now. He's got a new deadline with a new subpoena for these documents and these records, and we will see what happens. But I wouldn't expect too much until they can actually put some teeth in it. And I don't know when that'll be. I don't know when. Probably when Jim Jordan becomes the speaker, you might see that happen. Maybe Steve Scalise, but you know, it's going to take some. It's going to take some more pressure, and you're going to have to get a lot more people than 30 people. You're going to need about 205, 206 Republicans, because that's what it would take to actually impeach Wray or Rodenstein or Sessions. Okay. So, that looks like what we have for today. Kind of slow news day on Sunday. Goodlatte was on Maria Bartiromo. He didn't have much to say, talking about the IG report. He still wants a special counsel, and that's what we have most to look forward to from the IG report. I think that's I don't expect that we're going to get any major bombshells. If you watch this channel, everything he's probably going to tell us we already know. We might get more details, and that'll be interesting. I certainly want to see what the details are. We'll find out how much the DOJ redacted. But ultimately, what we would want to hope comes out of the IG report is, well, it'd be nice if Mr. Huber would prosecute some people, drop some actual charges on some people, but we haven't seen that happen so far. It could, but it hasn't happened so far. So I think what most people are hoping for is that the information that comes out is damaging enough that it helps build more public support and more support in the Congress for Republicans to join together and pressure to get a special counsel or to apply more pressure on the DOJ. So we will see what happens. The summit begins tomorrow. Kim Jong-un and Trump. We'll see exactly what happens there. We'll see what happens with these documents coming from the DOJ. We'll see if Nunes actually gets them and how that goes. And we'll be getting the IG report on Thursday. So we'll stay on top of it. It's going to be a busy week. Thanks for tuning in. You guys have a good night. Bye.